Amen. We honor you. And tonight we have someone who has served our country, not in the military, but in public service. And Kevin Lundberg has quite the resume, but I've just simplified it to a few facts. 6 years in the Colorado State House of Representatives, 10 years in the Colorado State Senate, total of 16 years in our legislative body. He's now the executive director of the Republican Study Committee for the state of Colorado. And he has just been the co-editor of the book Unmasked 2020. How many of you would like to be unmasked? So, would you help me welcome this public servant who has served his country and served our state, former state senator Kevin Lundberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Oh, man. I don't know if I can follow a standing ovation, so. But I do appreciate your coming out, and we're going to spend some time looking at where we're at here in Colorado and around the nation. And now, you said something about marching orders in the prayer. I'm very anxious to hear that when we get to the Q&A, so you better start preparing what that's going to be, because I need to know myself. But I want you to understand a couple of things. One, let me talk about this book Unmasked 2020. It's something that we put together, meaning the Republican Study Committee of Colorado. I and Charles Heatherly, who was a senior policy analyst for the state Senate Republicans while I was there, and Senator Schulteis. I think Charles was around when you were there a bit, and anyway. 2 years ago, a little bit over 2 years ago now, the radical left took over Colorado government. They had the House, they had the Senate, they had the governor's office, and the changes they made were really earth-shattering. And we knew that somebody needed to make the case. It's one thing to wring your hands and say, well, there's a problem here, a problem there, but you kind of lose track of all the details. Well, we knew the details needed to be put in place. And the subtitle to the book, I believe, really says what we're trying to accomplish here. Colorado's Radical Left Turn and a Warning to America. So this is what happens when, and I'm trying not to be partisan as much as policy-oriented in my discussion here. Because it's not just that the other party took control, it's the radical left elements that took control here in Colorado. And what happened there? The book is actually 15 chapters plus a foreword, okay, and 15 authors, but I wrote 2 chapters, so you can do the math here, figure it out. Anyway, it's a perspective, an anthology of different perspectives on what has been happening in Colorado. We have some legislators, some former legislators, some journalists, attorneys, people who are in the know and understood it, and it really makes the case pretty effectively. Now imagine what might happen if the radical left took over the U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency. That's the warning to America. And we published this in September of 2019. Now the reality is right in front of us. And I'm therefore more motivated than most to understand just the depth of things. So let me review a couple of other things that have happened. And here's the way I want to break this out. I want to talk for as brief a while as I can possibly do, which hopefully will be shorter than a sermon. And then we can have a conversation, because I want to not just talk about what I'm considering important, but I want to really engage with each one of you on where you think we need to head the conversation here tonight. And I trust that at the end we will come with together on some real action plans, but we need to know the problem before we can figure out the solution. So first off, I'd like to start with some good news. I have before me a couple of documents that I highly recommend that you check out. And I'm going to put these notebooks back in the back when we're done. So as you're heading out, you might want to peruse through it. But I also have it available on my website, which is kevinlundberg.com, under the Lundberg Report. How many have seen the Lundberg Report? Pretty good number, and then some haven't. Well, let me tell you about that as well. I publish a weekly newsletter. Now, I did send it out over email for several years until about a month ago. I was sending it through MailChimp, which is one of the big, email listservs companies out there. Well, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I sent it out and then discovered a few hours later that MailChimp didn't send it out. And it wasn't because they had a glitch, it was because their computerized system censored it. Now, the irony was that particular newsletter, I really backed off. And I gave some information, but I wasn't advocating, I was just saying, consider this, and their system pulled the plug on it. And then I couldn't even get an answer from them for a couple of days as to how come. And finally they said, oh, well, we looked at it after that, and our system, get this, the computer system they have that filters all this stuff, and some of it's for legitimate reasons, in case there are too many bad email addresses or something like that, they'll kind of pull the plug or send you a warning or something. But on this one, they just didn't send it, period. And they named the computer system Omnivore, eats everything. And it's just flat out big tech censorship. And then when I asked them, well, what did I do wrong in this? They said, well, we looked at it personally, with human eyes, and we think it's fine. I said, okay, but what snagged it so I don't do this again? At which point they said, well, we can't tell you that. I'm serious. They said, we can't tell you that because if we tell people what we're looking for, then they might not do it. They'll figure out a way to, quote, get around it. Yeah, right. Anyway, so I do publish it on my website. Now, I do have an email system that I went with another company, so I'll send out reminders. But my weekly Lundberg Report is now published and just permanently on my website. I may change it over to a separate website that just, like thelundbergreport.com or something like that. But I'm going to have it up there, and I'll have last week's and the week before, and so it'll all be there so you can refer it to anybody. Just give them the link, and they're in business. And what I try to do is I try to consolidate what I consider to be the most significant issues that we need to talk about or think about, and pass on to others. And I would invite you to, sign up for the email or at least check it out on the website. But if you're on the email list, sometimes in the middle of the week when something really big hits, I'll send out another message. So if you want to stay really up to date, just go to kevinlundberg.com, click on subscription, give me your name, your email address, and I do ask for your zip code just so we can kind of figure out where this is distributed. But A, we don't spam you, I don't share it with anyone, and B, I don't even know where you live. So, beyond the zip code, which you're on your honor system to do. So, the good news I have is, first, a 49-page document that was on the White House website all the way up to the 21st, the day of the inauguration, and then it got pulled mysteriously that day. It's called Trump Administration Accomplishments. Now, I've seen a lot. I used to say if you Google something, but anymore I say if you DuckDuckGo this, and it really is a huge difference, because Google censors all of their search engine materials. working up to the election and then past the election. If you wanted to find out something, if you go to Google, they'll just give you one side of the story. They will not give you both sides. DuckDuckGo will give you a much clearer picture, and I'm sure there are other search engines out there as well. Anyway, so the Trump administration accomplishments, as I say, if you DuckDuckGo the Trump administration accomplishments, you'll get a lot of shorter versions, but this is the full load as, and I say Trump administration, I'm not saying Donald J. Trump exclusively, because he hired a lot of good people who did a lot of good things. Check this out. It's important to remind yourself and to not listen to MSNBC and what they think of it, or CNN. The other one is another thing that was on the White House website until the change in administrations, and that's the 1776 report. And that is the President's Advisory 1776 Commission, and they published this month, January 2021. It is an excellent, excellent statement on our nation's founding and what we're all about, and the fact that our nation was founded upon the principles that were established most publicly and most clearly in 1776 on July 4th. With the Declaration of Independence that said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights that among them are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And governments are established among men to secure those rights. If anybody asks you, what is good government? Good government is government that secures the rights that government had nothing to do with. God established that. And they understood that. And so I highly recommend this. You won't find it on the website for the White House anymore. You will find it if you go to my last Lundberg report, and a link that'll click you, put you right there. So this is a reminder that the Trump administration did an excellent job in administering the U.S. government, and it was based on that principle of securing our God-given rights. And the president acknowledged all the time that it wasn't him, it was God who established those rights. And those were good principles that supported the family, that supported strong economic principles, that understood the sovereignty of our nation and the necessity we have to stand up to other nations when they're not doing things right. It understood that religious liberty is a foundational principle. It's private property, it's the freedom of speech, it's the freedom of religious expression or freedom of conscience that really count, that mean the difference between free people and serfs. Okay, that's what they were doing. Now, somebody else is in the White House today, and boy, does he have a pen. Has he been signing a lot of documents? He has already established open borders. And what has happened? Well, thousands of people, I understand, are heading towards that border. And he's going to open the door and say, come on in, and he expects millions. What about the subject of abortion? Under the Trump administration, abortion was limited as much as possible through federal policy. One of the first things that the current resident in the White House has done, I guess I haven't mentioned his name, have I? Well, I won't. He is making abortion as available as possible and forcing it on programs in other countries. What about the Paris Accord? Remember, that was that bad deal, which if you look, no nation is going to follow that, except, of course, the guy who just said we're going to go back into that. Now, when God created the human race, what did he create? Male and female, he created them. Well, the guy in the White House can't figure that out. And so he has established this new policy that genders will be fluid, genders will be, you can say anything you want. Oh, actually, we'll get down to Congress, we'll get further on that one. Then there's the COVID control. You know, he was the guy who said, in my first 100 days, you know, we're going to wear masks. And so he went as far as he could on the front end, which is to mandate that, to dictate that in every federal facility. And that's just the beginning. A mask is one thing, a forced vaccination is another. Or maybe not a forced vaccination, maybe just a second-class citizen if you chose not to. And just to get a little bit scientific on you, you know, they say that it's about 90% effective. Well, you know what's almost 100% effective? If you got the disease and you recovered, which is 99.9 something percent of the population. But they're not going to call that good enough. No, you've got to get their injection rather than the actual antidote, which is to recover from it. What about the nation of Israel? What did Donald Trump do? He said during his election, I am going to move the embassy for the United States government to Jerusalem. Just like Bill Clinton said, and I think Obama said, I don't know if he did or not, and George Bush and Bill Clinton. But what was the difference? Trump did it. Well, and then what was he doing? He was making peace deals between Israel, not just, okay, we won't fight. No, we will establish normal relations with several Arab countries. I think it was 4 that actually completed it, and I heard they had about 10 others lined up for completing that. But I don't expect the current resident of the White House to do that. What I expect him to do, because he's shown every effort, I understand he's even floated the idea of moving the embassy back out of Jerusalem. Oh, that'll be a great statement, yeah. If you go to Washington, D.C. today, are you welcome in the nation's capital? What is the predominant style of dress in the nation's capital today? It's camo, right. And now I have every respect for the men and women who are wearing those uniforms, but I have very little understanding as to why they've turned Washington, D.C. into a militarized zone. And for no good reason, none whatsoever. They're just trying to, I think, get us all ready to this. What about if you were Canadian and you were, you had something to do with the Keystone Pipeline? What did the current resident do there? Well, he's killed the deal. So he, stuck a stick in the eye of the Canadians as a beginning point. Who did he say he was going to put in charge of the gun control issues in the nation? Yeah, Beto. I say no more there. Okay, well, what about Congress? What was the first thing they did when they came back? They impeached the president, and of course impeachment is to remove somebody from office. Oh, I'm sorry, he's already out of office. And then the Senate seems to be marching towards that same drum, despite the fact that they know that it's not, it's an acquittal for sure. I trust that it will blow up in their face and that Trump's defense will be, let me give you the facts on how this election really was conducted, because the article of impeachment that was passed by the House of Representatives is an open door to talk about what no court has dared to touch, which is there have been significant election misdeeds that have resulted in the overturn of a legitimate election. Okay, are you familiar with the Equality Act? Some are, some aren't, I'm sure. This has been passed by the House. It has been out there for a few years now, and it is the homosexual agenda for public policy, and it will put under the gun Christian schools and colleges. Maybe there will be some protection for churches, but maybe not. It will be a violation of the biblical standards of marriage. Oh, I'm sorry, they already destroyed marriage, the term at least. But anyway, the Equality Act is a huge one, and that one you can expect to happen very soon coming out of Congress, and the current resident in the White House will in fact sign it, guaranteed. Now, I understand that they've changed the policy for debate, discussion, and official statements for Congress. They have gotten rid of it, and this is the irony. So it's not that they've become more open in expressing gender. No, what they've done is they've outlawed actual gender. Remember, God created them male and female. Those are the only two concepts that are now verboten in Congress. You know, here's some of the examples I was reading that seamen will now become seafarers. Yes, those seafarers. Chairman or chairwoman will become chair. Okay, I can almost live with that one. Familial relationships like father, daughter, niece will be replaced by gender-neutral equivalents like parent, child, and I love this one, siblings child. So instead of a niece or a nephew, you're a siblings child. Some phrases that use he or she will be rewarded, like submit his or her resignation. In one rule will be changed to resign. In other places, it will be replaced with such member, delegate, or resident commissioner. The word, and now this one is just choice. The word themself will replace himself or herself. Now, themself, according to the English language, is a plural statement. So no longer will it be a plural statement. So they're reinventing. Now, I would just love to see this in Spanish. Because, you know, everything's gender this or that in Spanish. It's absurd, and actually it might be a good advantage for Spanish-speaking people to realize that their very language will be ostracized if this prevails. So let's go back to, I want to get a little closer to home now in Colorado legislature, and I'm just trying to give you, kind of a touch on where things are at right now. I've discussed the book on Mass 2020, highly recommended. You can get it at any big book outlet online. No, I don't expect them to be carrying it, even though if 20 of you marched into your local bookstore and said, I'd like a copy, maybe they'd order a case. You know, it wouldn't be a bad idea. But you can order it online, and it's available on one really big booksellers line, which I hate to mention anymore. And there you can get the ebook version of it as well. I think it's $14.95 plus shipping for the paperback, and $4 for or $3.99 for the e-version. So the state legislature starts in the first part of January every year and serves for 120 calendar days, or so says the calendar, or the Constitution, the Colorado Constitution. This year they met on the 13th of January, and they were there for 3 days because it takes 3 days to pass bills. And so they got all the bills that were introduced, all 7 of them. And Dave, how many bills are usually introduced the first day? 100. One for every legislator, but this year it was only 7. And they all passed because they were all vetted by the leadership, of course. And then they recessed for a month, at least. And then they'll come back maybe on February 16th, and maybe they won't. But they made a rule change as well, and as a former legislator, I've got to tell you that this may seem like getting in the weeds for a lot of people, but this is a very, very big issue. They said that during an emergency like we have right now, which the governor seems to be kind of perpetually keeping this going, during an emergency, legislators can legislate from home. They can, yeah, I mean, it's almost unbelievable. They can debate, they can attend committee meetings, they can amend bills, they can vote at home. And it's as good as if they were there as far as the standard. Now, this is what this really does. It allows, oh, and they can collect per diem too. This is choice. So, you know, the Republicans in the House really took a stand on that, realizing how absurd it was to pay per diem, which is supposed to cover, you know, some of the costs of of going down to Denver and living there for 4 months. But you're going to get paid even if you stay at home, which is kind of crazy. But they can vote at home, but what it really means is they really can't legislate. Because legislation is not just voting. It's that back and forth interaction that you have with all the other members of the body. It's that ability to take them aside and talk to them, you know, and say, hey, I've got this amendment idea that I think might work. Let's go find 5 others and see if we can't put this together and make this happen and make a bad bill maybe a little better, or make a good bill a lot better, or maybe kill the bill or whatever. That won't happen if you're all sitting at home. You'll just vote, and the leadership will have already established what will happen. So this is a complete takeover of the legislative process. So you as individual citizens will no longer have a representative in the legislature. You'll have a representative sitting at home, you know, typing in a vote, which is just absurd. It's not against the constitutional rules, and that's because nobody ever thought it could be a possible scenario. Oh, here's another one. Have you heard of the gas tax and the car tax? Oh, I'm sorry, they're called fees. Because, of course, it would require a vote of the people if it were a gas tax or a tax on cars. But there's a bill that they're floating around right now that they will present that will increase the gas tax at the pump, and it will increase the registration for older vehicles. And, you know, maybe it's a time to raise more money for roads, but not illegally, because the Colorado Constitution actually says 2 things now. One, it says, with Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, that to raise taxes, it requires a vote of the people. And just because they call it a fee doesn't mean it is a fee. You know, they've got their legal strategies, but they are just working around the side on this. But secondly, there was one good bill or proposal that was passed in the last election in November, and that is a requirement that if it's a fee and it raises over $100 million over 5 years, that requires a vote of the people as well. And that's what we thought we were voting on. But they found a little way around that, and they said, oh, no, that's for a new enterprise. If it's a fee for an existing enterprise, it still doesn't require a vote of the people. So, you know, we're going to see that sort of thing happening there. And of course, you know, they have done so many things that we covered in Unmasked 2020. You need to read the book, you really do, to understand how deep the corruption of government goes and how strong the tyranny might become and how much more it will happen when it happens at the federal level, which we are looking right down the barrel of right now. So the last topic I want to cover on just in my chat on the front end here has to do with what do we do? And I'm not about to propose a solution right here and now, but I know that there are a couple of things that we need to start thinking about. And so I'm just kind of whetting your appetite for what I expect will be the main event for tonight, which is our conversation. And that is the politics of it, the elections. I've already made it clear to you that I'm convinced that there's enough evidence out there that we should question the authenticity of the election that just occurred. What I'm insisting is not that we just run with it and say, okay, the election was rigged. No, we need to figure it out. It needs to be sorted out piece by piece, top to bottom, not just in the swing states, because these are systems that exist everywhere. And here in Colorado, I believe we can point to some elections that are pretty questionable, just if you just look at the numbers as to who got it here and there, and how come this was so much out of character from that. Well, we need to know why. And we also need to know how the rest of the system here in Colorado is working or not. You're aware, I'm sure, that we have an all-mail ballot system. It means everybody gets a ballot who's on the voter registration. Or I should put it this way, every voter registration or registrant gets a ballot. The question is, are they valid, legitimate citizens living in that jurisdiction, or are they not? Nobody knows. And until we know, we have a system that is not to be trusted. But I'm not saying that we should not trust elections. I'm saying we should sort it out and figure it out. Now, I know that the ruling party here in Colorado and at the nation's capital, they don't want to figure it out. And I'd like to know why, because the current occupant of the White House has some 70 million people who probably don't trust the results. And it would be in his best interest, especially if he wants unity, to convince everybody that this was a legitimate election. So why isn't he doing that? Well, I think you know the answer, but we need to find the real answer, which is what's working, what's not working. You know, when we went to all-mail ballot elections, and that was back in 2013 with House Bill 1303, it not only established all-mail ballots, but it took all of the inactive voters, of which there are over 300,000 listed on the Colorado voter registration list. Over 300,000 were just automatically turned into active voters, and they all got a ballot. Here's a great example. Summit County in 2012, the year before that bill passed, there were, according to the census of 2010, 21,000 people living in the county. 21,000. And that included everybody, citizens, non-citizens, people 18 years and older, children below that. So actual valid voting citizens was something less than 21,000. You know, 15, 16,000, something like that. Actually, 14,000 people voted in 2010. So that makes sense. Do you know how many people were on the voter registration rolls? 24,000. After 1303 passed, they sent out 24,000 ballots to a county that had 21,000 occupants in it. Go figure. So we need to fix this. We need to insist on it. And we can't do it all at once, but what we have to first do is to be convinced of what the facts are. And the facts are not what you're going to read from CNN, that no one has proven this. You know, no court has ever proven this. Yeah, every court has rejected it entirely. This is why I think that there might be a silver lining to this impeachment if Trump's attorneys will actually dig down and say, here's why he's not guilty of lying about the election, because he was right. And they need to demonstrate that, I believe. Anyway, we also need to get involved with the party. Now, you get involved with whatever party you want. I'll tell you, I'm a Republican, and I think that's the party that has the better idea. I've battled with all, you know, with most of them, probably all of them at some point in time. Actually, there was one vote in the House that was 63-1. 64-1, that's right. No, 63-1, because the other person wasn't voting for a reason. Anyway, we need to actively engage in the political process. And let me talk to you if you are a Republican. If you are a member of the County Central Committee, you'll be deciding who your leadership will be in a few weeks. You need to find out if they are focused on the right issues and are going to stand for that, because those people you put in charge of your county party will then go on to the State Central Committee and elect the leadership there. And I believe it is vitally important that the chairman of the Republican Party understand that election reform is an absolute must. It's not going to happen overnight. But if they don't understand that, I don't think they, A, understand what the grassroots of the Republican Party believes, and B, I don't think they understand how you can win an election if you don't know you've got an election. And without accurate elections, you have no election. So, with that, I am going to open this up, and I've bloviated far too much. Oh, well, I only went 17 minutes over. Ann is going to, you've got a microphone right somewhere coming up here. And I want to hear your thoughts, and let's do a little interacting. I find that this usually digs deeper than I can ever dig on my own. So you want people to come up front. Thank you.
Listen, I was sitting here listening to everything you said, and I am a Colorado native girl. My parents were staunch Republicans, high up, pretty high up in the Republican Party. In fact, I'll tell you a little secret. When I was so many years, Nixon was campaigning in Colorado, and I got to be a Nixon girl. I got to wear a paper dress that said Nixon all over it. So I have been raised and reared in the Republican Party, and my blood is boiling right now, Senator, because of everything that is going on. I love this state, and I hate to see what's happening here. And I've been watching body language as he was speaking, and I know you feel the same way. So I know you have questions. If you want to come up, we can just make a line here, and I'll hold the microphone, and please feel free to ask whatever questions you have. And I'm glad I wore my flat boots and not my heels.
And speak up for my tired old ears, too.
Yes, I read that book. Well, I haven't calmed down since I finished it. And that was about 2 months ago. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know, remember which chapter it was. I don't remember who wrote it. But they were talking about Polis's emergency orders or emergency powers. And according to this in the book, it said that he can have those for 30 days. He can declare this big emergency. He can have it for 30 days. At the end of those 30 days, the legislature can vote to extend it for another 30 days. That's the end. Am I right or wrong?
No, that's not how the law reads. Unfortunately,
Did I read that wrong? This
is how it works. The governor can declare an emergency for no more than 30 days. The governor can actually renew an emergency to go beyond the 30 days for another 30 days. But there's always that 30-day limit, but the governor is the one who calls it. The legislature can at any time meet and rescind the emergency. That's where the legislature plays in. I wish it was that way, that the legislature would be required to, and actually that's one reform that needs to happen, not just here in Colorado, but around the nation. And as a matter of fact, I think it ought to happen not only at the state level, but at the county level, because individual, the governor has that authority, but the dirty little secret that very few people understand, but we've been living under the authority of, the health department can just do whatever they want, whenever they want, when they think they've got an emergency on their hands. And they can dictate a great deal. I believe that they need to be directly accountable to the legislature as well. And local health departments should be directly accountable to the county commissioners. And here's how it would work in my mind. Because I do believe there's a role for health officials to, there are times when somebody's got to say, hey, wait a minute, we've got a problem here, we've got to fix this. You get a bad flood and you get a lot of unsanitary situations that need to be sorted out quickly. I was in the House when there was a huge tornado that ripped through Windsor, part of my district. Hundreds of homes were destroyed. The governor had a right to declare an emergency there, and the local health departments had an authority and a right to come in and say, we've got to make sure that this is a decent environment for people to come back into. But they should be accountable to the local elected officials. Therefore, I believe for an emergency to hold for any longer than just a few days, it should require an affirmative vote from either the county commissioners or the state legislature, depending on the level it was at. Well, because the law doesn't prescribe that. The law says that the governor can declare an emergency for up to 30 days. Now, I'm not going to give Polis a free ride on this one because he has been fudging on that too. Because if you look at his now 300 plus emergency orders, 300. Every time he issues one, 30 days start at the point of that executive order, not at the point of the declared emergency, because this is important. He declares an emergency which gives him extraordinary authority, but only within 30 days. But every time he declares puts a new executive order out, he stretches it for 30 days. So 10 days into the to the declared disaster, he stretches it out another 10 days beyond that, and that, and that, and he's breaking the law, but he is actually living within the prescription of he can declare the emergency. The other catch is, in this case, with an infectious agent, it can only be done if it's a deadly infectious agent, and if it's about as deadly as the flu, and we don't do emergency orders, declarations for that, then they're on pretty shaky ground there too. But as I say, health department can go far beyond that, and they need to be controlled as well.
I don't know if I understood this correctly, but did you say that El Paso County Republican Party, Central Republican Committee, they're about to vote for leadership?
Every 2 years.
Is that something we can be part of?
The members of the Central Committee for the county party, and those are, and I think each county is a little bit different, but essentially, and so you correct me as I'm wrong here, it's your precinct committee people and your other officers within the county and your elected officials who are Republicans are a member of the Central Committee. That's how it is in Larimer. I suspect it's pretty close here. So if you're simply a registered Republican, you actually made that decision back in the caucuses almost a year ago as far as who were in those positions of authority so as to be the Central Committee for the county party. I'm hearing the word yes. But it's something that you wouldn't have a vote for. Now, we've got another weird thing this year, and that is the whole, social distancing stuff and remote voting. The legislature did change the rules so that it could be virtual, which I wish it were happening right here in this room, which you could do. What? You are meeting? Oh, fantastic. So El Paso County can do it the right way. Excellent. February 6th.
Senate and that, they're going to do virtual. They're going to do the Zoom
so the
stuff.
District
They're
meetings
allowing
will be
all that.
virtual.
And we had some Republican senators that signed on to that. as well.
Yeah. Well,
I won't mention their names, but if you ask me, I'll tell you later on.
okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to let you take it the direction you want. Any other thoughts? Yes, there's a lady over there. Do take the microphone if possible, or if not, I can repeat it.
Well, yes.
The question is, does the health department have free rein when it comes to an emergency? The basic answer is yes.
How do they get that power? I mean, what I'm asking is, how can we stop them from doing some of the stupid,
Okay.
ridiculous things they're doing? If they have free reign, who are they accountable to?
In a much milder climate, political climate, the health department was given quite a bit of latitude in dealing with medical emergencies, in this case, pandemic type emergencies. We revisited that law, I think in like 2010 or so. I'm kind of looking at a former senator who might remember. He doesn't remember either. But the statutes do give them a great deal of authority. And quite frankly, we didn't see this one coming. I'll tell you. Didn't realize there would be as much tyrannical control from the top as we see right now. Now, I'm not a real fan of how the health department handles a lot of things. It's in Chapter 6 in Unmasked 2020, by the way.
Change it. I mean, what can we do to get that power away from them?
Well, first you need to educate yourself on what's out there. And it's in Chapter 6. Secondly, you need to talk to others, particularly your elected representatives. Thirdly, you need to be patient because it's not going to happen under the current legislative powers. But these are issues that need to be sorted out. Listen, when I was in the legislature, I attended a special meeting on pandemics following the H1N1 issue. And I know that we didn't know all the answers. We were assured that there was a protocol in place. They blew the doors off of any protocols. And, it's very obvious that not just in this country, but internationally, a whole lot of political advantage. Never let a crisis go to waste. Well, this one, they have certainly put their agenda in place. Now, the final, how do we? We need an army of conservative, liberty-loving, activist citizens in this state, in this country, who will stand up and say, no more, we are ready to put freedom back in place. Hi, Peg.
And a PS, if you don't go to church here, you need a culture impact team at your church.
So if I might, Senator Lundberg, just give a little bit of clarification on the health department and how that works. Just as a former county commissioner representing you, many of you, my name is Peggy Littleton. So what the legislature did is at that point in time, they allowed for the Board of County Commissioners to seat people on the local health department, the county health department. So we have a voice on electing who is going to get in there. We get to interview them, which means that we have to have people apply to be interviewed, right? And then we get to seat them. City Council gets 2 slots, Board of County Commissioners gets 2 slots. The rest of them are filled by the Board of County Commissioners, the 2 that are the elected officials, actually interviewing and appointing people on the board, on the health department here in El Paso County. The legislature, they didn't really like that at this point in time. There's actually a bill up right now to co-opt that and not allowed local boards of county commissioners to appoint to local boards of health. Why do you think that is? Because we intentionally loaded it with people that were like-minded to us, right? And so, to be very honest with you and candid, local boards of health and local county commissioners can, if they have enough leadership, say, you know, just like Weld County did in Fremont County, we're not going to abide by that. We're not going to adopt those policies that the state is forcing upon us in our county. And so we need to hold our elected officials responsible for what they're doing. We need to have the guts and the balls to get out there and do the right thing.
Thank you.
I have a question for Commissioner Littleton, or former. Yeah, I understand. And that is, one, a statement that some counties are a little bit different. Like in Weld County, the commissioners are the Board of Health, which is their home rule, like El Paso, and that's the path they chose. But if the commissioners can't appoint and maybe I missed it and you said it,
Okay.
who appoints the board?
The Board of Health,
They
local,
become a self-appointing board?
no, the local Board of Health is appointed by the Board of County Commissioners.
And that will continue. Okay, I missed.
Well, that will continue. However, what they're going to do is take away some of the authority. So they're only going to allow one county commissioner to be placed on a local Board of Health as opposed to two of them.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
then other bodies like city councils, like so in El Paso
So
County,
it's
right?
an attempt to take less, take more authority away from
Correct.
elected officials.
That's correct.
And it needs to be the exact opposite.
Correct.
Elected officials need to have full authority over all appointed board decisions, because you elected those people, and when it gets through several chains of connection there, they become somewhat rogue in their approach to policies, and some may do a good job. But understand, in Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution, every state is, and this is the word, guaranteed a Republican form of government. And that doesn't mean the Republican Party. That means representative government. You, the citizen, select those who will govern over you. And when undue power is given to appointed officials rather than elected officials, it's a violation of a Republican form of government.
Okay, so now I have a question. If I'm understanding you correctly, aren't the county commissioners over the health department? I mean, who has jurisdiction here?
Yes, they can appoint to the Board of Health, yes. So the county commissioners have two representatives on the Board of Health. And those representatives to the Board of Health are the ones who interview people that are going to be appointed on the Board of Health. So that is correct.
But they don't have the
But they
authority
don't
to
have
override decisions.
They do not have the authority to override the decisions of the Board of Health for the local. So the thing is that we need to make sure that we get people on the Board of Health through county commissioners that are going to have like minds, right? That will lead in an effective way. So, and who will be strong enough to stand along with the Board of Health and the county commissioners to say, we're not going to do that in this county. But you can have a lot of input. There are Board of Health meetings you can go to and make your voice heard. You can attend those meetings and say, we disagree, okay? And you can stay there for the vote and hold their feet to the fire. It's about being engaged and involved. And if you'd like to know how to be engaged and involved, I'm going to give you my cell phone number. Text me, call me. I will help you get engaged and involved in El Paso County politics, because we need people of a good constitution who are moral and who understand what our calling is that God has given us to be engaged and involved. So my cell phone number is 719. You can just text me, but if you text me, just make sure and put your name with it so I don't call you back and go, well, hi, who is this? So it's 719-660-5566. And we'd love to get you engaged and involved here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
Any other questions, comments?
Peggy Littleton.
Hi. I worked as a U.S. Census enumerator this past fall, and I have since read that the total count can be used to change the number of representatives from a district. However, the question was not posed in the list of questions that we asked the individuals, are you an American citizen? So how could they possibly, you know, I've read headlines and articles, and they were from conservative sources saying that, you know, they may be changing the number of representatives from such and such a district because I guess they're assuming that the head count is all citizens.
Okay,
do you know
let me cover it because you've hit a pretty key issue that we're going to be looking at pretty quickly here, because this is the year that both state and federal legislative districts are realigned. And it has to do with population for both the U.S. House and and in Colorado, the State House and State Senate. And first and foremost, no, it doesn't have anything to do with if you're a citizen. It has to do with whether you're a human being or not. That's the way it has been interpreted. And President Trump was trying to say, wait a minute, it should be U.S. citizens being represented rather than just human beings. You know, in the state of California, there are what, 3 or 4 House districts, if you look at the total number, that are there because of non-citizens living in the state, let alone whether they were legal or not, because they just count heads. And, you know, the Census Department does try to count heads appropriately, and I'm sure a lot of people are trying to game it as well. But the department itself, I believe, is diligently trying to do this. But they cannot distinguish between citizens or non-citizens. And that's part of it. But let me bring this other point up because it's a very important thing to understand. In Colorado, it used to be that there was a commission set up to determine the state, let me think here, the state legislative districts for the House and the Senate. And that was a commission appointed by the legislature, the governor, and the Supreme Court justice. And then for the federal offices, it was the legislature who determined how the U.S. House districts were divided up. Again, all according to population, according to what the census, U.S. Census did, which they did in 2020. And now the numbers are supposed to be generated so they can figure it out here now in 2021. So then in the 2022 election, it'll be the new districts, okay? But we changed the rules here in Colorado to a somewhat randomly selected commission for both federal offices, 2 separate commissions, one for federal and one for state offices. And I'm actually very concerned with how this is going to work out, because that commission, which is, you know, it's almost the equivalent of grabbing a phone book, except they don't exist anymore, and grabbing 10 names out of it and say they're going to be the commissioners. But it's people who volunteer, who have no political experience, and I mean that, because if you were in the legislature over the last, I think, 5 years or something like that, you cannot apply to the commission, and the application date, I think, is already passed now. So now they're going to winnow it down. Or if you held an office of authority within your political party, you cannot apply. The only political class, shall we say, who can be a part of the commission are journalists and college professors. Yeah. And then all other citizens, if you will. But this is going to be a very different system, and that's something to bear in mind as you're looking at new districts too, or let's say you would like to run, or you're talking to somebody else who wants to run for the state house or for Congress for that matter. You're not quite certain just where that district is going to be until those lines get drawn, and they won't get drawn for many months from now. So anyway, be aware of that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Addressing that on a little bit of a curtail there, city council district lines have in our city been redrawn. I used to be in District 6. I'm now in 5. So we're voting for city council members coming up here pretty soon. And in preparation to do that, everybody in here needs to check the charts and see if they're in a different district.
Okay.
So that's go on.
And where can they check that? Where are those districts listed?
Text me and I'll give it to you. I've got it
Does
on my
anybody
phone,
know? Can you?
coloradosprings.gov.
Okay.
And I also went to govotecolorado.com, and it brings up your precinct number, and it brings up that long number, and it tells you what district you're in for everything. So
Yeah.
that's all there. And I took a screenshot of mine, so I have it on my phone.
Yeah,
But it surprised me that I'm no longer in 6.
Well, and that's a good point, to check to see what districts you're in.
Yeah.
At least for the state and the federal level, and your precinct number and your county number is within that 9-digit number that's your voter registration number. You know, the first number, I believe, is the congressional district, which down here is 5, okay? And then the next 2 digits, I believe, is your state Senate district, and then the next 2 digits is your state House district, and
You even got your library district number in there. I thought there's a
yeah, in your library.
Okay, but my
But it's a
question
good number.
is a little bit of a segue. Since you brought up the Central Committee meeting, I'm going to count this as a viable question. I'll be there that Saturday. We have a lady in the room who's thrown her hat in the ring to become, or to potentially become our chair. Vicki Tompkins is running for re-election. A man named Carl Snyder is running, and Peggy Littleton's running. And I asked her if it would be okay if I asked her why she's thrown her hat into the ring. So if we can give her just a minute or two to answer that question.
I'm going to take a vote here, but I think that we're saying no, not at this time. Thank
Yeah, I
you.
believe the policy is
Yeah.
there for the event here.
Because this is a culture impact team and we try to be nonpartisan, we can't just have one person. Now, if we do a forum, which we will, then everyone's welcome to speak. Does that make sense? But it wasn't because we advertised a forum. This was
And
for-
I get that, because if that were afforded, I think all the candidates should have been said, by
Right.
the way, we're going to give you 2 minutes to explain why you're doing what you're doing. So, you know, it's a good question, though.
I know the Democratic Socialists want to make Washington, D.C. a state. Is that being pushed right now pretty hard, do you know?
Say that again. I didn't quite.
Washington, D.C., the Socialist Democrats want to make it a state. And is that going to be pushed through, do you think?
Oh, statehood for D.C. The answer is a good question. Let's see. I'm trying to think. It takes. Does it take a supermajority in the House and the Senate, or does it take a simple majority? If it's a simple majority, they might be able to push it through. And that's a good question. That's a very sobering one, too, because it's not just D.C. It's Puerto Rico. You know, you can go on the list. That's one of those political nuclear bombs that they could unload. Yeah. And yeah, you know, it kind of brings me to one thing, and that is, we need to be as effective as we possibly can. And if you think you're going to sit at home and watch this happen and see anything but, you know, but destruction and doom, go ahead and sit at home. But if you want to see something happen, you need to get engaged. But you also need to realize that we're not alone. If you read Scripture, you understand that God directs the path of the king. He gives us a great deal of responsibility, especially in a system of supposed self-government. But the government will only be as good as we make it. And we need to get engaged and involved and pray for God's mercy and guidance. Because here's what would happen with the state of D.C., which is actually kind of, you know, okay, here's another thing. I don't think they can do it in D.C. because it would violate the Constitution. Yeah, the Constitution requires that 10 miles square be set aside for the nation's capital, and that's Washington, D.C. And they would have to either form a new capital, or they would have to amend the Constitution to eliminate the need for a national capital. So it's an interesting point, but it just kind of flashed in my brain. Wait a minute. Go back to the guiding document, which is the Constitution. And if you haven't read it, read it. And if you have read it again, because it's true, it's written in a fairly complicated manner because it was written so that the average plowman of the 18th century could understand it. And we struggle with that today. But it is written for the individual citizen. Is there a question back here or a comment?
Another question. This goes back to what you're talking about, Governor Polis. You said he's breaking the law.
Yes.
So how do we get him to, how do we hold him accountable, and how do we do it legally to get him not to do that?
There are 3 legal mechanisms that I'm aware of. One is you try to recall him. Now, we've tried that a couple of times, but not very successfully so far. Number 2 is you vote him out of office when that comes up. Or number 3, somebody needs to take him to a court of law and, what's that?
Action like a lot of us to do.
Well,
can we
it
do
doesn't
that?
have to be a class action. It has to be somebody with standing, and I would think that any Colorado citizen should have standing on the action of their governor. But I'm not an attorney, and I'm definitely not a judge. So, they may find some technicality around that. But really, when an elected official does something illegal like that in an executive type fashion, it needs to be taken to court.
Okay, exactly, specifically, what is he doing to break the law? What has he done?
What I was stating was that he was exceeding his authority in declaring medical emergency or a state of disaster by exceeding the 30-day limit that he was in. And I believe that we have now established that this is not a highly deadly infectious agent. This is a highly contagious infectious agent, and it is deadly to an extent, but that word highly is clearly meant to be something of an extraordinary nature, like the Spanish flu of 1918, where 20 or 30% mortality rate. It was something really high. So takes extraordinary measures to fix it. But look at some of the blue states as soon as that guy in the White House was inaugurated. Now suddenly the emergency is a whole lot less. And even in this state, the governor is starting to say, okay, well, maybe we can start opening up more. In a couple of months from now, I heard him say this today, we can start easing off on this. My guess is, this was all politics. This was heavy-handed, ugly politics.
Done that. And if he goes and says, well, let's open this up, and can we still sue? Can we still take him to a court of law for what he did in the past?
These girls are feisty.
Yay, man.
Now I understand sound is not as good up here.
No,
so
I said, if he does and goes and opens the state, let's say he opens the state in a couple months.
Yeah.
Can we take him to task and take him to court for what he did in the past?
Probably not, because the only remedy that would be reasonable would be for him to stop doing it. I don't think he's done enough so as to, there actually isn't a legal remedy for removal of a governor from office. That's up to we the people, which takes 25% of the total vote here in Colorado to sign a petition to put them up for recall within a 60-day window, which is very difficult in a small district and almost impossible at the state level. In the state of California, they're trying to recall Governor Newsom, and Yeah, they need 1.4, actually 9.5, so almost 1.5. But that's 12.5% of the vote. The standard is twice as high in Colorado, and let's say half as long. So, you know, it's set up in order to prevent any recalls from successfully happening, except in really unusual circumstances. The mask mandate, is that illegal?
Is that a law? Or is, no, I know it's not a law, but if I go and somebody tells me to wear a mask, can I tell them no and not get in trouble for it?
Yeah, you can get in trouble for it. And there are some local jurisdictions, can't cite exactly where, but where you can be cited for that or you know, forcibly ejected from that facility or something like that. There can be a consequence to that. Is it a law? It's not a statute. You won't read it in the Colorado Revised Statutes, but it is, it does have the force of law, being an executive order from the supreme executive authority in the state, which is the governor. He has issued an executive order, and yes, he's supposed to only live within the laws that he's allowed. But when it comes to the emergency laws, or the laws under an emergency declared disaster, he is given quite a bit of prerogative. I mean, here's some examples. He can change how roads work. Why is that? Well, let's say you have a flood somewhere and or some contamination where you need to get everybody out of Denver. He could literally say all roads lead out of Denver, no roads lead into Denver. So both, you know, all lanes go one direction. He has that specific authority under that circumstance. And I, for one, would leave that in the law. But I also believe, as I said before, that when it comes to these long-term things, he needs to be subject to a legislative, and not just the legislature can rescind it. I believe the legislature should be required to meet and vote and approve it.
Yes, sir.
And that's what commissioners should have to do as well. So, any other thoughts? Ken.
Oh, you don't? Oh, he wants to exposit.
Don't mean to take this from you. I like having you in charge of it. Okay, DC statehood. Yes, they could indeed give DC statehood. The issue from a constitutional standpoint would be then who is in charge of DC. And that is where you have the constitutional concern there. But they very well, Congress could indeed give DC statehood. So let's hope and pray that they don't attempt to do that. There's been a lot of talk about it. Not so much, I haven't heard the chatter recently, but I'm sure they feel like they've got 4 years. They can what the havoc they've wreaked in 7 days, they can wreak a whole lot more havoc in 4 years. And so yes, it is not unconstitutional. They could do it. But again, the problem is going to be who then is in charge. Is Congress now running DC? Or does DC have its own government? And that's going to be
okay. I'd have to study that one because I actually do disagree with your analysis, and I do understand also this points out a very important principle. Yeah, well, an important principle in government. You have to recognize it's not perfect. It doesn't work like a finely tuned engine or something like that. There are some rough edges where it can be this way or it can be that way. My insistence is because Congress is, because the Constitution requires that a state capital be set aside and that a 10-mile square area be designated as that, that's not a state. And I believe that one of two things would have to happen for it to be that. One, the Supreme Court would have to ignore that, which I think they're capable of. I saw them ignore something most recently that they should have stepped up and said, it's our job, because they have original jurisdiction in questions between states. There's no other court. that can actually settle an issue between two states than the Supreme Court. So when the state of Texas and 17 other states brought suit against the state of Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court had an obligation to deal with it. And they dodged it. So they could do that in this case too. And they could just dodge it. And the other, I forget the other one, but that's one where it could happen. But I would still insist that a clear reading of the Constitution sets that geography aside, because a state is defined by its geography. That's how it's accepted by Congress. You know, they define the actual legal parameters, boundaries of the state, and Congress has to approve, this shall be the state of blah. And there are other hoops as well, you know, but that's how they handle it. And so, you know, it is a real concern. I'm not diminishing that.
Okay.
I just have a question regarding trusting in our electoral system once more. What would you suggest to people that they do to not just let this drop off and nothing more happen?
A very excellent question. And that is, do we just talk about it? Well, no, but I think we start there. Actually, I want you to start one step beyond or before that, and that is sort out the facts for yourself as best you can. Let me tell you what I'm working on. Is as executive director for the Republican Study Committee of Colorado, I am encouraging the board of directors for the organization to hold what we've been doing for many years, is an unofficial but public hearing on a particular topic. The topic being election irregularities. The official state audit committee of the legislature did hold a hearing on election issues, and they went on for over 8 hours. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the time was devoted to people who said, we've got the gold standard. And there couldn't be any problems in Colorado that are worth talking about because we have the gold standard. Well, I'm not convinced of that. And we didn't spend enough time looking at, okay, but in the chain of events that happen in an election, every link has to be solid and secure for the outcome to be proper. You can have an election that's conducted entirely correctly, but you didn't have the right people registered. In other words, you had a lot of looseness in the system. You know, I've said some of this before, but the dilemma we have in Colorado is that first, we put everybody on the rolls, regardless of who they are. We just said, you know, we'll just trust them. Secondly, to register to vote, well, we've got same-day voter registration, so this is a choice one. You can go and register to vote at some vote center the day of the election, and they will give you a ballot. You voted immediately, put it in the box, and you voted. Then they go back and figure out if you actually are legitimate or not. I mean, they may run your address through a little quick check, but you know, if you provide, actually you're supposed to provide evidence of where you live and ID, but if you go down the list, you know, it's supposed to be your driver's license. Well, if you don't have one, how about another state-issued ID? If you don't have one, how about another ID, you know, military or something like that? If you don't have one, how about, well, it gets all the way down to a utility bill in your name with your address. With Photoshop, I can make 50 of those with different names and different addresses, by the way. But that's good enough. But if you don't have that, then you're to give the last 4 digits of your social security number. But if you don't have that, then you're supposed to sign a statement that says, under the penalty of perjury, I am who I am. Oh, and by the way, they don't check those last 4 digits right then and there. At least that's what I've been told. But the point is, you can go on the day of and you can register to vote. You can be given a ballot and you can vote. And then, frankly, if you're a crook, you can go to another place in another county and register to vote under another name, or even in the same county. I just recommend you don't do it at the same center twice. But you can do that again and again and again. That's a weak link that can be, you can game the system. You can go out and, in my county, years ago, in a nursing home in my hometown, somebody came through and registered everybody in the Alzheimer's unit. People that didn't know their name, didn't know their address, which is a legal requirement to register to vote. That was voter fraud. And I'm sure somebody came back on voting, before the election was over and helped them vote. There are so many examples. Here in Colorado, we also have what's called automatic voter registration. If you interface with any department in the state of Colorado, they are required to take your name and address and turn it over to the Secretary of State's office, and they register you to vote. If you're not, I'm sure they probably look at it and say, okay, this person at this address is already registered, so we'll not register them twice. But let's say that you've got a different name. Like there was a young man who worked in our Senate offices who grew up here in Colorado Springs. He was registered to vote here, and he had a very common name. He moved to Denver, registered to vote there, and bada bing, bada bang, he got 2 ballots every election. Now, he only used 1. But even identical, because it was a different address, but it was the same name, but they didn't go any further than that, and he just got registered to vote twice. Well, we need to make sure that our voter registration is solid and secure. Oh, here's another thing with automatic voter registration. They don't check your citizenship there either, unless it's the Department of Revenue. But for all other departments, they do not check your citizenship. They cannot, according to the law, because the law doesn't prescribe that they can. So they just turn it over. And this is all the Secretary of State does, is they send a card out to you and say, you're registered to vote. And if you can think of any reason why you shouldn't be registered to vote, then tell us. Well, yeah, let's just work out a scenario. Let's say you were here illegally and you get this, and I'm like, whoa, I'm registered to vote. I must be a citizen. Unless I tell them otherwise. Well, and actually somebody who's a friend of mine who does translation for Spanish and is very familiar with the culture down in South America said in a lot of countries, you are required to vote. Required, or you're penalized. So if they get this, you are now registered to vote, they're liable to think if I go and tell them I shouldn't be registered to vote, now I get into trouble, let alone the fact that I'm not here legally. So that's a weak link. That needs to be checked out. Now, what about ballot harvesting? Somebody goes out and they collect 50 ballots. You're only supposed to be able to harvest 10 ballots in Colorado. You shouldn't be able to harvest any. But that's illegal. And that's another way the system can be gamed. And then what about the integrity of the voting equipment? Do we trust it or not? I don't trust it unless it's verified. And it needs to be verified by verifiable systems. And I've talked to enough people who are experts in this well enough to know that we don't know. And I'm not going to accuse Dominion voting systems of cheating. I'm going to state the facts. They refuse to tell us how their system works. They refuse to open up their software to experts who can really read this clearly. They refuse to show all of the components to the equipment that they have in. They just stonewall it all. Instead, they just try to is the hook coming? Okay, another question.
I thought Ken had something, but maybe not. Anybody else? So we have about 5 minutes. Okay, hold up. Can't hear you.
Let me hear it.
No, 2 things. One is that Joel Altman never got to the hearing because they said his temperature was up, even though he's tested negative. But he has the information from Antrim County, Michigan, with that town of 23,000, where a judge ordered a forensic audit of Dominion, and he was ready to testify that at the hearing, and they wouldn't let him in. But anyway, they actually did a forensic audit, and it's on the web. There's a PDF of it on an AMMO site. And so it has been examined.
Well, to the extent, and it failed there, right? Yeah, the system failed there. Yes, I understand that. And so we have an example of where it did fail. I understand it's a big country with a lot of things happening. We need to have a fair and open system of examining the problems. And here in Colorado, we need to see it from top to bottom. We need to figure out the registration system. We need to figure out how the votes are conducted. We need to stop playing games with making elections well, for example, the Secretary of State sent out multiple cards begging people to register to vote. That should be up to the citizen rather than, because you can bet that it was a selective list that they sent to as well. There are so many irregularities. Yes, there's a gentleman over here. I want to emphasize this one point. For those of you who are working on the leadership within the Republican Party, make it crystal clear to anybody who wants a significant position of authority that that election integrity is of paramount, vital, absolute significance. It must be figured out. I will guarantee, I was with a group up in Loveland a week ago, and they were ready to walk out of the party. A good number of them, not quite as many people here, but nearly. And there is no other place to go. Let me answer that question that was never asked, if I might. What about a third party? It won't happen unless everybody leaves all at once and it's the same party. But I give you a hint. It'd be better if we reformed the party we're in. And I can tell you the grassroots are ready for the team to be put in place that will insist on election integrity, that will insist on a party that's active, aggressive, and involved, that will insist that we actually go like we were serious about this because we need to be. Yes, sir.
A little while ago you said that, I think it was Summit County, I think you said, that there's a population of 21,000, but they had 24,000 registered voters.
Correct.
Okay, that happened all over the country. There's reports all over the place. In fact, Trump in a speech said that the state of Pennsylvania had 205,000 more votes than registered voters. Happened all over the country. How can those even be counted? Why aren't those, that district or county or whatever, why isn't that all thrown out when you've got 3,000 more people voting than are registered?
Okay, now let me be clear. That was the number of people registered. I don't have the numbers how many actually voted, but I can tell you that when we went to an all-mail ballot, that many ballots went out. In that very same year, my sister got 4 ballots. 4 ballots. She had moved in September, this was 2014, from one county to another. She registered in the new county. The old county sent her a ballot, the new county sent her a ballot. And to the home she moved to, 2 ballots showed up in the names of other people. Now imagine, she was quite straightforward, and I have 3 of those ballots because she didn't vote with them. She voted with the one legitimate ballot. But how many people were tempted to just go ahead and fill it out and send it in? And then, of course, you've got the whole question of signature verification, which is a very arbitrary system. You can set, the county clerk can say, we want 1% rejection. We want 10% rejection, of their automated equipment, and then they look at it with their own eyeballs. But even there, if you have a valid copy of that person's signature or the signature that's on record, it goes through. So there is a lawsuit that was filed a few months ago here in Colorado because the example I gave you is the most egregious I'm aware of. But yes, in most counties there is a higher number of registrations than there should be. And that's because they have such a sloppy system. And I can almost accept that because that was the system we had when we understood that somebody votes in a certain area, then they move away and they didn't tell the clerk. The clerk doesn't know, but they don't come in and vote. Okay, well, that's why we had the inactive voters category. Is if they didn't vote in 2 general elections, they dropped into the inactive category, which meant they're first tier ready to be dropped from the voter registration list so as to keep them clean. And it was up to the county clerks to figure that out when they were looking after the lists. Now it's held by the Secretary of State, and that's another story. What was the what? Oh, you know, my mind is not remembering the group. Does somebody recall that? They actually sued LA back in 2017. Judicial Watch, thank you. Yeah, it was Judicial Watch who filed that lawsuit. It'll take months, if not years, to work through. The majority of states, of counties in Colorado were listed as probably not having the right number. Now, I think you probably are the hook now.
So unfortunately, our time is up, but can we thank Senator Lundberg again? Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank everybody for coming. We've dug into some pretty deep issues that we need to get to the bottom of as citizens of this nation. I believe it's our God-given responsibility to be citizens who will be the solution, not part of the problem. Thank you.
And I'm going to let Pastor Mark close us out tonight in prayer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Senator Lundberg. And real quick, I want to give you some information that will help, because what I sense and feel in this room is, what can we do? We are here to serve at CFAN, so if you're from another church and your church is open to starting a culture impact team, we've got things ready to send to you right away, and I want to give you a powerful tool. Download the Church for All Nations app, and you can go and find the Culture Impact Team on that. And I went on, and there's a little button. You just push live, and I was watching Senator Lundberg on our app. The other thing is basically, let's see, February 10th, we're having Dr. Alex McFarland here for our next Culture Impact Team meeting. He is a powerhouse. He's a dear friend, teaching at our practical government school right now. And so we encourage you to come to that. But on the Truth and Liberty, how many of you watch Truth and Liberty? You watching that? Okay, if you go to truthandliberty.net, we had David and Tim Barton this Monday night. We had Dave Riffle and Ken Davis before that on Culture Impact Teams. Then we had Pastor Bob Emmerich. Those three go together so well because it speaks to pastors, speaks to what a culture impact team will do, and David Barton gave us hope on Monday night. We've got to win local battles. And the last thing I want to share, if you'll download the CFAN app, we uploaded the message, Run to the Roar by David Barton. How many have seen that? If you haven't, it's a must. And so we want to encourage you to do that. Thank y'all for coming out. And if you check our website, we'll keep you posted how you can get involved. So, Father, we thank you tonight for everyone here. Thank you for Senator Lundberg, that Lord has such a heart for the kingdom of God and for the state of Colorado. Continue to bless him. Lord, take his rich experience and continue to multiply all the efforts that come through him and the seed sown. And Father, I thank you for everyone here and every church represented. And I just pray, Lord, that you continue to bring together the citizens of this state and show us the path, Lord, to win these local battles. We thank you for it in Jesus' name. And everybody said amen. You're blessed.